Welcome to the week that was, but we mostly wish it wasn't, for the week ending August 22nd, 2025. This is a weekly roundup of the highlights and lowlights and main stories of campus anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. This week I had about 40 stories to choose from. If something is happening in your neck of the woods, please be sure to let me know. I'm your host, Andrew Pessin. I am a professor, but please don't hate me. For more about me and my work, visit andrewpessin.com. And for all the details of today's stories and loads more stories, follow me on X at Andrew Pessin. All right, let's get to the news. We begin in the Anti-Israelism Destroys Everything It Touches department. The American Association of University Professors, once a fairly storied institution defending the rights of faculty, college faculty, not only recently dropped their opposition to academic boycotts in order to support a boycott against Israel, but now has openly adopted a foreign policy, as its president says that the organization, not just him, but the organization believes that no weapons should be sent to Israel, neither defensive nor offensive. Haverford College, the federal government has opened a Title VI anti-Semitism investigation there. This follows the dismissal a couple months back. A court dismissed an anti-Semitism lawsuit largely on First Amendment grounds. Canada, a new report from ISCAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, documents how Canadian universities have become hotbeds for anti-Israel and anti-Semitic activism, fueled largely by foreign state actors, Exhibit A being, of course, Qatar. Quote, the report not only describes the historical context that allowed such radical ideologies and actions to manifest across campuses, but provides an in-depth analysis of the organizations both on and off campus that enabled and supported them, end quote, says the report. George Washington University. The school has suspended its chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace, which critics suggest is neither particularly Jewish and is definitely not in support of peace. But that JVP chapter has been suspended essentially for the entire school year for having violated multiple university policies this past spring. This follows its largely being suspended the previous year for having participated in the encampment in the spring of 2024. The State Department announced this week that it has terminated more than 6,000 student visas due to criminal activity or support for terrorism. About 4,000 visas alone were revoked because the visitors broke the law, including assaults and DUIs. The number having to do with assault was roughly 800. Meanwhile, those whose visas were pulled due to support for terrorism, the number was given between 200 and 300 students, engaged in behavior such as raising funds for the federally prescribed terrorist group Hamas. Many institutions collaborated this past week in putting on a symposium, a Teaching Palestine Today symposium on the topic of Zionism, which of course featured exclusively anti-Israel speakers and nobody supportive of Zionism, but in addition also featured Sami al-Arian, who pleaded guilty years back of conspiracy to provide services to Palestinian Islamic Jihad, again, a U.S. designated terror organization. So now we have all these universities openly bringing convicted terrorists to speak. This symposium was sponsored by numerous Middle East studies departments and similar departments from Harvard, Georgetown, George Mason, Rutgers, Brown, University of Chicago, CUNY, Columbia, George Washington, NYU, and so on. Moving to the lawsuit/legal department, UC Berkeley was hit with yet another brand new anti-Semitism lawsuit this week, as an Israeli scholar of dance alleges that she was denied a job there simply because she's Israeli. The lawsuit describes pressure by graduate students in the Department of Theater, Dance, and Performance Studies who objected to hosting any Israeli scholars, and what the department chair described as a politically hot situation within the movement, and apparently was foolish enough to tell this candidate that that's why they weren't hiring her. Meanwhile, a federal judge dismissed a lawsuit against several pro-Palestinian organizations that alleged that they were fronts for the terrorist organization Hamas. That includes National Students for Justice in Palestine, the National SJP organization, the Westpac Foundation, which funds many, many anti-Israel causes, including SJP. The judge determined that after examining the evidence, that the plaintiffs had not proven their claim that the organizations provide, quote, ongoing, continuous, systematic, and material support for Hamas and its affiliates, end quote. Speaking of Students for Justice in Palestine, Indiana University put their SJP chapter, known as the Palestine Solidarity Committee, on a cease and desist status for their disorderly conduct, essentially indefinitely suspending them. BDS had a successful week this week, several victories. In New Zealand, Otago University student government readopts BDS against Israel. As far as I could tell, they had already adopted BDS at least once before and just felt the need to reaffirm it. Iowa City Council passed a boycott Israel resolution, the first city in a Republican state to do so. And Uruguay has frozen its cooperation agreement with Hebrew University. K through 12 continues to be a hot domain for this topic. Turning to UCLA, it has a K through 12 ethnic studies certification program. Those who've been following the ethnic studies situation know that California is considering requiring ethnic studies as a requirement to graduate high school, as well as an entry requirement for the University of California system. AMCHA Initiative has been doing some wonderful work fighting against that in California. Nothing wrong with ethnic studies per se, except ethnic studies as it is currently constituted tends to be extremely anti-Israel and or anti-Semitic as well, teaching a version of history in which the Palestinians are just the indigenous victims and Israelis are essentially white Jewish supremacist colonial occupiers. And indeed, in this UCLA program that is providing certification for people to teach K through 12, they're using a book called Teaching Palestine, which is just filled with entirely the anti-Israel narrative. Meanwhile, the National Education Association, which is the largest teachers union, you might recall that last month it voted to cut ties with the Anti-Defamation League. That later got overturned by their executive committee. But it turns out the NEA has also cultivated close ties with the teachers union in the West Bank, also known as Judea and Samaria, whose leader has openly expressed support for terrorism and for October 7th. They've also launched a GoFundMe campaign to benefit what's called the Solidarity Fund for Gaza, raising $6,000 for that fund. Those monies go to a variety of groups, including those that openly support terrorist groups. Canada, not wanting to be left out, the Toronto School District has been distributing a 5-page Palestine resource for teachers of elementary school children. It teaches that Hamas isn't a terror group, that Israel is really Palestine, that Wikipedia is a useful resource on this topic, and that the IDF is the IOF, the Israel Occupying Force. Meanwhile, in the domain of professional organizations, mental health, the profession of mental health continues to be inhospitable to its Jewish members or to many of its Jewish members. Um, in the mental health world, there's complaints this week that regulators there have been completely silent over a book called Decolonizing Therapy, which was published shortly after October 7th, that demands that Zionism be treated as a form of mental illness. And I won't go into the details there, but they are quite ugly. Here's a few things that have been going on in the mental health world since October 7th. Jewish clinicians with Zionist affiliations have been blacklisted on social media. A Facebook group for physician moms removed Jews from the group. A doctor at University of California, San Francisco Hospital tweeted that the university should investigate whether a new, quote, Israeli medical student, who in fact was a Persian American Jew, committed genocide before coming to UCSF. A professor and director of counseling at Villanova University taught her students that the colonized mind and Zionism are mental illnesses alongside fascism, rape culture, and genocidal tendencies, and so on. And just when you thought geography was safe, the Association of American Geographers wants to quite literally wipe Israel off the map. This association became the latest professional association to face pressure to adopt a boycott of Israel after a recent member petition urged the association, quote, to endorse the campaign for an academic boycott of Israeli academic institutions. In the Jews Are Our Own Worst Enemies department, the Center for Jewish History has offered a fellowship to an active anti-Zionist activist who's also a member of CUNY for Palestine. There were several naughty professors this week. The University of Albany Law School professor there called for Israel's elimination. An NYU professor delivered a 2-hour lecture on Israel's, quote, genocide, happening to not mention Hamas once in the course of 2 hours. The University of Toronto was busy A professor there went on an unhinged anti-Semitic social media rant, open endorsement of Hamas, denying Hamas rapes, calling all Israelis fascist genocidaires, accusing Israel of raping prisoners to death, and so on. And another University of Toronto professor in the medical school spread anti-Israel propaganda and lies in various newspaper columns, most recently lying about Gaza genocide and starvation, claiming that Israel blocks aid trucks. And finally, even the punk rockers in Chicago, there was a punk rock concert where several acts went full tilt anti-Israel. So that's the news, unfortunately. Tune in next week to see what fresh horrors next week shall bring. Again, I'm your host, Andrew Pessin at andrewpessin.com, and hoping everyone manages to keep it together till next week. Hang in there.